Okay, so we're back after a week off, and we're going to be we're actually again going through the teachings for victory, and we're all the way up to, pardon me, looking back to our friend this morning. Where are we? Yeah, King Rinda, Alpha, decrease. No, how did we get a boarding pass from London? Okay. It's number 8, King Rinda. It's on page 123 when we start reading the actual lecture. But as usual, we're going to read the Gosho first. Okay? And again, as I was just mentioning before they started turning the cameras on, the story of King Rinda is metaphorical for you to understand that there's a message in the depth of this. And if you wanted to go to the Gosho, White Horses, White Swans on page 1061, it would also mention the story of King Rinda and the White Horses and White Swans. Okay? So I'm going to start reading now. Everybody ready?
Yes.
I'm going to start with the background on page, and hopefully I can get through this fast enough to read the next Gosho, which is letter to Jakunichi-bo. Okay, so the background starts on page 990. And I'm going to need to share this with you, baby. Everybody with me?
Yes. Yep. Yes.
Background. This letter was written in Minobu in the 8th month of 1279 when Nichiren Daishonin was 58 years old. He was towards the very end of his life, right? It was addressed to Soya Doso, a son of Soya Kyoshin, one of the leading believers in Shimosa province. As this letter describes, in the 3rd month of the same year, Doso had taken the opportunity of a Buddhist memorial service to make a large donation to the Daishonin. At the time, the Daishonin was living in the wilderness of Mount Minobu. Doso's donation had supported over 100 disciples in their practice at Minobu that year. Thus, it seems likely that Doso's determination to protect and support the Daishonin was quite strong. The Daishonin opens his letter by referring to the 2 sacks of parched rice he has received from Doso. Parching was a method commonly used during the Kamakura period to preserve rice, and parched rice was frequently taken along as food on journeys. Noting that rice is something that supports life, the Daishonin praises the greatness of lay believers who support the life of the votary of the Lotus Sutra. Then the Daishonin employs the metaphor of the 5 flavors, stating that while the various sutras represent the 5 flavors, the Lotus Sutra is the Lord who rules over the 5 flavors. While the 5 flavors are something that nourishes life, he explains, the Lotus Sutra represents life itself. The Daishonin further reveals that the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra is the soul and eye of all the sutras through the Buddhist parable of King Rinda and his white horses. He teaches that benevolent deities use the voices of people chanting Daimoku as sustenance to increase their power and energy. He continues by relating that the growing influence of leading Buddhist schools such as the True Word Zen and Nimbutsu has caused the various gods and deities to cease their protective functions. Because the people of Japan, by practicing these teachings, slander the correct teaching and Nichiren Daishonin, the votary of the Lotus Sutra, the 3 disasters of famine, pestilence, and war occur. He teaches that those who chant Daimoku should be confident that they will never fail to receive the protection of the benevolent deities. I want to read that one again. He teaches that those who chant the Daimoku with faith, with the same mind as Nichiren, should be confident that they will never fail to receive the protection of the benevolent deities. The Daishonin thanks Doso for his generous contributions, which had made it possible for many of the Daishonin's followers to concentrate on the recitation and study of the Lotus Sutra. Because this form of practice of the Lotus Sutra constitutes the greatest kind of Buddhist practice in the latter day of the law, the Daishonin says, that Doso's deceased ancestors would be extremely pleased with this act of benevolence. He suggests that Doso's actions, therefore, represent the highest form of filial piety, citing Shakyamuni Buddha's statement that one who practices filial piety must be a world-honored one. The Daishonin praises Doso highly, saying, Are not you yourself such a world-honored one? Are you yourself not such a Buddha? Is what he said. Okay, so going on back to page 983 and the beginning of the Gosho in volume 1 of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. It's Gosho number 136, King Rinda. He says, I have received the 2 sacks of parched rice you sent. Rice may seem like a very small thing, yet it is what sustains human life. And the Buddha says that life is something that cannot be purchased even for the price of an entire major world system. Rice is what sustains life. It is like the oil that sustains the life of the lamp. The Lotus Sutra is a lamp, and its votary is the oil that sustains it. Or, again, the lay supporters are the oil that sustain the lamp of the votary. Everybody getting the metaphorical, okay? Mm-hmm. He's saying, among all the 100 flavors, the flavor of cow's milk is the finest. We've heard this analogy given before in other Goshas as well. The 7th volume of the Nirvana Sutra says, of all the flavors, the finest is that of milk. When milk is treated, it becomes cream. And when cream is treated, it eventually becomes ghee. Of the 5 flavors represented by this process, ghee is the finest. If we employ these 5 flavors as similes for the various Buddhist teachings, we might say that the 3,000 volumes of the Confucian school and the 18 major scriptures of Brahmanism correspond to the flavors of ordinary foods. They're non-Buddhist teachings, right? Remember the 5-fold comparison? Mm-hmm. Right? That this is backing that up again. But he's going to go a step further. He says, in comparison to these, even the Agamas sutras are like the flavor of ghee, right? Mm-hmm. Based on the 5-fold comparison, that's what it says, right? Non-Buddhist teachings are inferior to Hinayana. Hinayana is inferior to Provisional Mahayana. Provisional Mahayana is, okay, right? He says, among the Buddhist teachings, the Agama Sutras may be compared to the flavor of milk, the initial. So he's saying non-Buddhist teachings were not even into the flavor of milk yet, okay? But we start with the Agamas, which is Hinayana, okay? That's the flavor of milk. The meditation and other sutras of the correct and equal period may be compared to the flavor of cream. The wisdom sutras may be compared to the flavor of curdled milk. The flower garland sutra may be compared to the flavor of butter. And the immeasurable meanings, Lotus, and Nirvana sutras may be compared to the flavor of ghee. Okay? He says, however, again, gotta say it another way, or just as he said, or again, as the lay supporters are. Let's see, he always gives two definitions, okay? He says, he gives a more precise one. He says, again, if the Nirvana Sutra is compared to the flavor of ghee, then the Lotus must be compared to a Lord who rules over the 5 flavors. So he's saying, if the immeasurable meanings and the Lotus and the Nirvana have been lumped in as the perfect teaching, they're ghee. If you try to compare the Nirvana Sutra to the Lotus Sutra or the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra to the Lotus Sutra, neither one of them compare. So if they're already ghee, then the Lotus Sutra must be compared to a Lord who rules over these 5 flavors. Wow. You getting it? Because what he's getting to, ultimately, he's going to get to, it's not just the Lotus Sutra, it's the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, right? He's headed to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in explaining that his teaching, even though it's now being revealed for the first time, is the true teaching for the latter day. And it is predicated in all the teachings that have preceded it. Okay? I'll start that paragraph again. If the Nirvana Sutra is compared to the flavor of ghee, then the Lotus Sutra may be compared to a Lord who rules over the 5 flavors. Thus the teacher Myolo stated, if we discuss the matter from the point of view of the doctrine taught, then the Lotus Sutra stands as the true Lord of all the teachings, since it alone preaches opening the provisional and revealing the distant. This is the reason that it alone is permitted the word myo, or wonderful, in its title. It also said, therefore we understand that the Lotus Sutra is the true Lord of ghee. Do you understand? Sort of like relative myo and absolute myo, right? If you compare it as a teaching, it's one thing. If you compare it as what it actually is, it already includes what you're comparing it to, so you can't compare it. Do you understand? It's life itself. He's going to use that analogy. These passages of commentary point out quite rightly that the Lotus Sutra is not to be included among the 5 flavors. as has been taught up to this point, even in Tintai's teaching. Do you understand? Is everybody with me? He's saying the main import of these passages is that the 5 flavors serve to nourish life, but life itself is Lord over all of the 5 flavors. Do you understand? The essence of our life, right? Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. The Tentai school puts forth 2 views on this matter. So he says, here's where the confusion comes from. The leading proponent of the teaching of the Lotus Sutra is the Tentai school, right? So he's saying, this is where the confusion comes from. The Tentai school puts forth 2 views on this matter. The first, that of more of an expedient to get people to help understand the truth. The first is that the flower garland, correct and equal, wisdom, nirvana, and the Lotus Sutras are all comparable to the flavor of ghee, because they're all the teachings of the Buddha, right? He says this view would seem to be based on the opinion that the sutras preached previous to the Lotus Sutra and the Lotus Sutra itself are similar in nature, by virtue of the fact that they were all preached by the Buddha. That had been the leading accepted concept of the day, right? He says the scholars of the world are familiar only with this particular view and are not familiar with the doctrine that the Lotus Sutra is the Lord of the 5 flavors, as Myolo has just referred to, he just mentioned a minute ago. Do you understand? Which is also the Tentai school, right? He's the 7th, Myolo is the 7th patriarch, right? So he's saying, the view that although the Lotus Sutra and other sutras, hang on, did I miss something here? The scholars of the world are only familiar with this particular view and are not familiar with the doctrine that the Lotus Sutra is the Lord of the 5 flavors. Hence, they are deceived and led astray by the other schools of Buddhism, who say that they're all the same. He's saying the view that, although the Lotus and other sutras differ with regard to whether or not they open up and incorporate the expedient means, they all represent the perfect teaching. This is a doctrine that reflects the meaning of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Do you understand? He's making a distinction because there's a difference between theoretical Ichinen Sanzen and actual Ichinen Sanzen, right? So that's what he's qualifying here. This is all theoretical. You're not talking about actual Buddhahood, any of that doctrine that compares them in that manner as being even remotely equal. Do you understand? He's saying, however, the view that the various sutras mentioned above correspond to the 5 flavors, while the Lotus Sutra represents the Lord of the 5 flavors, this is a doctrine that reflects the essential teaching, right? Versus the theoretical teaching. Actual Ichinen Sanzen. Do you understand? Because he's talking about Nam-myoho Renge-kyo now. That he says this doctrine was touched upon by Tentai and Myolo in their writings, but it was not clearly enunciated. I'm enunciating it now in my doctrine, in the latter day of the law and the Buddhism and sowing, after the 5th 500-year period. Do you understand? Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
This is why there are few scholars who are aware of it, and why nobody else is saying the same thing I am. They don't even know that this teaching exists. In the passage, because they've not looked far enough to find it. In the passage of commentary by Myolo quoted above, previously, the words, if we discuss the matter from the point of view of the doctrines taught, refers to the daimoku, or title of the Lotus Sutra, which is what is meant by the doctrines taught. The words opening the provisional correspond to the character ge of the 5-character daimoku, Myoho Renge Kyo, Myoho Renge, right? Okay. The words revealing the distant correspond to the character rin in the 5-character daimoku, Myoho Renge Kyo, right? Renge. The words the words it alone is permitted, the word myo correspond to the character myo, and the words this is the reason refer to the fact that when we speak of the Lotus Sutra as the essence of the lifetime teachings, when we speak of the Lotus Sutra as the essence of the lifetime teachings of the Buddha, we have in mind the daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. Therefore, one should understand that the daimoku of the Lotus Sutra represents the soul of all the sutras. It represents the I of all the sutras. Okay? But who has brought forth the daimoku of the Lotus Sutras being the correct teaching and the essence of the entire lifetime of teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha? Only Nichiren. Only Nichiren. So he's saying, No, regardless of what anyone has said prior to me now. This is what those teachings have said, and I'm now revealing it in the truth that it can only exist in the latter day as. Because it's about the Daimoku. It's not about the whole 28 chapter Lotus Sutra anymore. We're past that time. Now it's just about, he doesn't keep saying Nam Myoho Renge Kyo over and over and over again, but it's just about Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. He's qualifying that. Now whose teaching is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo? His. So he's talking about the original teacher and his original disciples coming up here. He's saying the Lotus Sutra should, by rights, be employed in eye-opening ceremonies to ensure their effectiveness. In other words, the only thing really right now in the latter day of the law that would work to consecrate an object of devotion is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. You can do all the true word ceremonies and all the Nimbutsu bullshit you want to do. It ain't going to make any difference. Those are powerless objects of devotion. Okay? That's why I'm leaving you the Gohonzai. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. That is the object of devotion of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Understand? He's saying the Lotus Sutra should be by rights employed in eye-opening ceremonies to ensure their effectiveness, but it would be a slander to do so in the absence of the correct object of devotion. But instead of that, the Mahevachana, true word, and other sutras are employed in eye-opening ceremonies for all the various wooden or painted images of Buddhas. As a result, none of the Buddha images in the temples and pagodas of Japan, though their forms resemble that of the Buddha, are really Buddhas in mind. Rather, they have the minds of ordinary beings who live in the 9 worlds, because that's who eye-opened them. Do you understand? Is everybody with me? There's been no Buddha nature instilled in any of those, or brought forth from them in their natural state. The custom of revering ignorant teachers as though they were wise men began with this. Accepting objects of devotion for people that weren't capable of providing them. Do you understand? Such practices simply waste the funds of the nation, because the emperor is the ones, the shogunate is the one supporting all this stuff with these temples. They do not produce effective prayers. On the contrary, the Buddhas are thereby transformed. They turn into devils and demons. This is what is causing distress to the ruler of the nation and the common people. And now, because the votary of the Lotus Sutra and his lay supporters have appeared, us, the Bodhisattvas of the earth, in the original teacher, people behave like many kinds of ordinary beasts who hate the Lion King, or like the plants and trees that tremble before the icy wind. But I will put that aside for now. Why is the Lotus Sutra superior to other sutras? Why is it beneficial for living beings? To illustrate, the plants and trees have the earth as their mother, the sky as their father, the sweet rains as their food, the wind as their spirit, and the sun and moon as their wet nurses. And in this way, they grow to maturity, bring forth flowers, and bear fruit. In the same manner, all living beings have the true aspect of all phenomena as their earth, the aspect-free nature, which is the same thing as their sky, if you look up number 4, and the one vehicle as their sweet rain, and the pronouncement that the Lotus Sutra is foremost among all the sutras that the Buddha preached, now preaches, or will preach as their great wind. Adorned with the power of meditation and wisdom as their sun and moon, they nurture the blessings of perfect enlightenment, put forth the flowers of great pity and great compassion, and bear the fruit of peaceful Buddhahood. Such is the way that all living beings are nourished. Then again, all living beings sustain life through the things they eat. There are many kinds of food. Some beings feed on dirt. Some feed on water. Some eat fire. Some eat wind. The insect called Kalucula feeds on wind, while the creature called a mole feeds on dirt. Then there are some demons that eat human skin and flesh, bone and marrow, some that eat urine and dung, some that eat lives, and some that eat voices. There are fish that eat stones, and there is the Baku beast that eats iron. And the deities of the earth, the heavenly deities, the dragon gods, the gods of the sun and the moon, the heavenly king, Chakra and Brahma, the beings of the 2 vehicles, the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas, taste and savor the Buddhist law and make it their body and spirit. You get it? Do you understand this is deep stuff. This could go like, what the hell was he talking about? Think about what he's saying. Your choice, what do you eat? Your choice, what do you put in your body? You determine the effect by making the cause. Do you understand?
Yes.
He's saying, let me give another example. Once in the past, now we go into King Rinda. Let me give another example. Once in the past, there lived a great ruler named King Rinda, a worthy monarch who ruled over the entire land of Jampavipa. Now, what was it that this king lived on? When he heard the sound of white horses neighing, his body would be nourished and thrive and rested and serene in body and mind. He would rule over his kingdom. This occurred in the same way that the creatures called frogs listen to the cries of their mothers and are thus enabled to grow, and that the autumn bush clover blooms when it hears the crying of the deer, and the ivory plants put forth buds when it hears the sound of thunder, or that the pomegranate flourishes when it encounters a stone. What's he talking about? The inseparability between you and your environment. Okay, Ashofuni. What you eat not only creates the body that you live in, but the environment in which you exist. It's cause and effect is what he's talking about. He's saying, so all these things, okay, so do frogs grow because they hear their mothers croak? Scientifically, I'm sure that's not the case. These are all things that the people of 13th century Japan would have believed and understood as being dependent origination issues, linked together circumstances of, this plus, okay? So he's saying, now what was it that this king lived on? When he heard the sound of white horses neighing, his body would be nourished and thrive and rested and serene in body and mind. He would rule over his kingdom. This occurred in the same way that the creature called frogs listened to the cries of their mothers and thus enabled to grow, that the autumn bush clover blooms when it hears the crying of the deer, that the ivory plant puts forth buds when it hears the sound of thunder, or that the pomegranate flourishes when it encounters a stone. This being the case, King Rinda had gathered together and kept in his care a number of white horses. And because these white horses would neigh only when they caught the sight of white swans, he also had gathered together a number of white swans, which he also kept in his care. As a result, not only did the king himself enjoy peace and tranquility, but the hundreds of officials and the thousands of attendants who served him also prospered. The entire Sahe world. Are you getting this? Are you catching what he's talking about? Kosen Rufu and the effect of the Bodhisattvas of the earth fulfilling their mission, what effect it will have on all living beings. He's talking about it. Think of it in this, don't think about this story. Think about the metaphor. He's saying, as a result, not only did the king himself enjoy peace and tranquility, but the hundreds of officials and the thousands of attendants who served him also prospered. Throughout the realm, the wind and rain came in their proper season, and other countries bowed their heads in submission. This situation continued for a number of years, but perhaps because of an error in his rule, or perhaps because the rewards accruing from his karma were exhausted, the thousands and 10,000s of white swans suddenly disappeared, and the countless white horses ceased their neighing. Now, what has he been talking about? He's talking about the Buddhist gods have split the country, right? Why? Because they're not being nourished anymore by the true teaching. Do you understand? They're being attacked by the slander of the incorrect teaching. So they've split, or they've turned into demons and whatever, bad things. They're not doing the protective thing. They're doing the punishment thing. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. He's saying, and because the king, who represents the Sahe world, because the king could no longer hear the neighing of the white horses, he was like a flower that wilts, or the moon in eclipse. His skin changed color. His strength waned away. His six senses grew dull and clouded, and he became like a senile old man, like me. His consort, too, the women in his life, the woman in his life, became old and feeble. The hundreds of officials. So all of this is everything affects everything else. The hundreds of officials and the thousands of attendants lamented, not knowing what to do. The skies clouded over. The earth trembled. Great winds and droughts appeared, and famines and pestilence occurred, until so many persons had died that their flesh piled up in mounds, and their bones were like heaps of tiles. Moreover, the country was beset by attacks from other nations. The antithesis of what had been when the horses were seeing the white swans and doing their neighing, right? At this time, the king, lamenting over what to do, concluded that the only recourse was to pray to the Buddhas and gods. From times past, there had been believers. Now listen to this. He says, from times past, there had been believers in the non-Buddhist teachings in the kingdom, and they were numerous in many regions of the land. So non-Buddhist teachings had been being practiced. There were also many people who honored the teachings of the Buddha and regarded them as the treasure of the state. The king, declaring that he would honor the teachings of whichever group was successful in attracting the white swans and causing the white horses to neigh first, commanded the non-Buddhist believers to try the effectiveness of their teachings. But though they carried out their efforts over several days, not a single white swan appeared, and the white horses failed to neigh. Okay? Sounds like the beginning of the latter day of the law to me. Then the king ordered the non-Buddhists to cease their prayers, and the Buddhists to make the attempt and the Buddhists to make the attempt with theirs. At that time, there was a young monk known as Bodhisattva Ashvaghosha. You've heard his name many times, or Horse Neigh. When he was summoned before the king, he said, "If your majesty will abolish the erroneous doctrines of the non-Buddhists throughout the kingdom and work to spread the teachings of the Buddha, it will be easy enough to make the horses neigh." So he conditionalizes it. He's saying, this isn't a circus. I'm not going to do a trick for you. First of all, you have to remove the slander, which is the real source of the problem with the swans. Okay? So then the king issued an edict that this should be done. Then Bodhisattva Ashvaghosha addressed the prayers to the Buddha of the three existences and the 10 directions, whereupon a white swan immediately appeared. When the white horses caught sight of the white swan, they whinnied in a single voice. No sooner had the king heard the single neigh of the horses than he opened his eyes, as 2 white swans, and then hundreds and thousands of them appeared. The hundreds and thousands of white horses were instantly filled with joy and began neighing. The king's complexion was restored to its original state like the sun, re-emerging from an eclipse, and the strength of his body and the perceptive powers of his mind became as many hundreds and thousands of times greater than they had been before. The consort was overjoyed. The great ministers and high officials took courage. The common people pressed their palms together in reverence, and the other countries bowed their heads. The situation in the world today is no different from this. The period during the 7 reigns of the heavenly deities and the 5 reigns of the earthly deities, that is, the first 12 reigns in Japanese history according to the Chronicles of Japan that he referred to in the previous Goshos. Again, each one of these Goshos is building on your understanding of the present day situation in which he's writing. Okay, so there's a history of Japan. It talks about that sun goddess and shit is before the human emperors take over with Emperor, what did I say, Kime or Jimmu? It's either Jimmu. It's Jimmu. Okay, so he's saying that is the first 12 reigns in Japanese history was like the Kalpa of formation. The power of good fortune and the power derived from the keeping of the precepts that had been accumulated in previous existences were such that, although the people of the time made no great effort toward goodness, the country was still well governed and people lived long lives. Then came the period of human sovereigns. During the first 29 reigns, the power derived from observing the precepts in past existences the power derived from observing the precepts in past existences began to weaken. because we're approaching the fifth half millennium. Government affairs proceeded poorly, and for the first time the country was visited by the 3 calamities and 7 disasters. But because the texts describing how the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of antiquity had governed the world were introduced from China, that's Confucianism and Taoism, these could be used in paying honor to the gods and overcoming the calamities and disasters that beset the nation. Do you understand? All right? So he's saying, when Emperor Kime the 30th, so it was Jimu, was the first, when Emperor Kime the 30th human sovereign came to the throne, the power derived from good fortune and the observance of the precepts in past existences had further weakened in the country. The karma represented by the temporary gatherings of 5 components entities that lived in it, okay, had changed in reflection of their dependent origination karma. Does everybody understand that? Mm-hmm. We all have a shared karma with the people of the latter day, right? We don't have the same karma as the people of the middle or the former day. That is a fact, no matter how much anybody wants to think otherwise. It's not the same. There appeared many people whose minds were dominated by evil. Good minds were weakened and evil minds prevailed. The teachings of the Confucian texts were so ineffectual and the weight of the people's offenses was so great that as a result of the Confucian texts, the Confucian texts were abandoned and people turned instead to Buddhist scriptures because they weren't getting any benefit from doing Confucianism anymore. So they turned to Buddhism, right? So that's how he's talking, the gradual switch over from Confucianism and Taoism and the teachings of the emperor from China had been replaced by Buddhism as it related to teaching. For example, Moriya. Does everybody remember Moriya? Moriya no Mononobe, I think was his name. Remember the Soya clan and the Mononobe clan, and the Mononobe clan wanted to hang out and hang on to the deity, the worship of ancestors, and the Soga clan was like connected somehow to Prince Shotoku. We already read all this, right? Everybody's with me? That's who he's talking about when he says Moriya. Okay? He's saying, so Moriya was the 2nd generation Mononobe guy that ultimately got his ass kicked by Soga. That's when Buddhism took over. All right? For example, Moriya paid honor to numerous gods, ancestors, who had appeared during the 7 reigns of the heavenly deities and the 5 reigns of the earthly deities, praying that the Buddhist teachings would not spread. Remember? He didn't want them to spread. He wanted to hang on to the old way. And that the Confucian texts would be honored as they had been before. Everybody's with me? Prince Shotoku, on the other hand, took Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, as his object of devotion, and adopted the Lotus Sutra and other sutras as his scriptures. The 2 parties vied for supremacy, as we remember reading that Gosho, right? Mononobe got their ass kicked. Mm-hmm. But in the end, the gods were defeated. He's saying, if the gods are on the Mononobe side and Buddhism is on the Soga clan's side, then the gods got their butts kicked, right? The 2 parties vied for supremacy, but in the end, the gods were defeated. The Buddha emerged victorious, and just as had happened in India and China, the land of the gods for the first time became the land of the Buddha. The old teachings were left behind, and Buddhism was embraced. The passage in the sutra that reads, "Now this threefold world is all my domain," was in the process of being fulfilled. Is everybody with me? Okay, so during the 20-some reigns from Emperor Kime to Emperor Kamu, a period of 260 or more years, the Buddha was looked up to as a sovereign, and the gods were regarded as his ministers. In this way, the world was governed. But although the Buddhist teachings held a superior place and the gods an inferior one, the world was not well governed. Now that 260 years, I looked up Kamu. I couldn't find Kamu, but he's going to mention Kamu is the emperor during the time of Dengyo. So he's saying from the beginning of Buddhism with Prince Shotoku, the beginning of Buddhism in Japan with Prince Shotoku, to Dengyo, and the clarification of the Lotus Sutra is supreme, and the latter day of the law is fast approaching. God, I wish I was a latter day of the law guy. That's what Dengyo's lamentation was, right? He's saying that's 260 years. The Buddha was looked up to as the sovereign, and the gods were regarded as ministers. In this way, the world was governed. But although the Buddhist teachings held a superior place and the gods an inferior one, the world was not well governed, because we're in the middle day of the law, getting closer to the point where the Lotus Sutra will no longer have its efficacy, right? We enter the fifth 500-year period where it's time for the Buddhism and the sowing to appear. Correct? According to the Lotus Sutra, right? So he's saying, people began to question why this should be so. And in the reign of Emperor Kamu, there appeared a sage known as the great teacher Dengyo, who pondered over this problem, just like Nichiren. Like, why aren't we being protected? I mean, that quest to save his mother, to figure out why isn't Buddhism working anymore, that's what propelled Nichiren's study of the text to understand everybody missed this part about the Lotus Sutra and the Daimoku. That's what's led to this point. This is written in 1258. He's about to die within the next 2 or 3 years. He's already been teaching his teaching since 1253. Okay? So, he's saying, pardon me. People began to question why this should be so, and in the reign of, there appeared Dengyo. Okay. The gods have been defeated, and the Buddha has emerged victorious, he asserted. The Buddha is looked upon as a sovereign, as the god as his ministers. The relations between superior and inferior are correctly ordered in accordance with the rules of propriety, and therefore the nation should be well governed. How strange, then, that there is such unrest in the country, Dengyo said. With this in mind, Nichiren's now saying first person, with this in mind, I began to examine all the sutras, and I realized that there is indeed a reason for such a state of affairs, that the Buddhist gods have all split. The teachings of Buddhism have been guilty of a grave error. This is Nichiren talking, among all the sutras, pardon me, this is Dengyo. Among all, the teachings of Buddhism have been guilty of a grave error. Among all the sutras, the Lotus Sutra ought to hold the position of sovereign, while the other sutras such as the Flower Garland, Larger Wisdom, Profound Secrets, and Agama Sutras occupying the position of minister or attendant or common person. And yet, the Three Treatises school asserts that the Wisdom Sutras are superior to the Lotus Sutra. The Dharma Characteristics school holds that the Profound Secret Sutra is superior to the Lotus Sutra. And the Flower Garland school holds that the Flower Garland Sutra is superior to the Lotus Sutra, while the Precept school proclaims itself the mother of all the other schools. There is not a single votary of the Lotus Sutra, and those who do read and recite the Lotus Sutra have been, contrary to all expectations, derided and dismissed by the people of the world. He proclaimed, Dengyo, that because of this, heaven was angered, and the benevolent deities who would have guarded the nation found their powers weakened. In other words, these are the teachings that Nichiren read, and he's going, Dengyo was on to something, Myola was on to something, Tentai, that's how this all happened. As he declared that, even though people praise the Lotus Sutra, they destroy its heart. And he declared that even though people praise the Lotus Sutra, they destroy its heart. Does everybody know he's talking about there? Dengyo's famous saying, and Nichiren has referred to this many times. People will talk about what a great sutra is, the Lotus Sutra, and then say, but it's too good. It's too heavy. It's too profound. They diminish it. They don't say, reject everything else as the Lotus Sutra says to. They'll say nice things about the Lotus Sutra, and then they'll say it's over your head. It's not the way to go. Do something else. So he's saying that's what he's talking about when he says, even though they praise the Lotus Sutra, they destroy its heart. That's what Dengyo was way into. He's going, you got all these guys that are saying the Lotus Sutra is great, but none of them are saying, forget everything but the Lotus Sutra, which is what the Lotus Sutra says. So Dengyo had already discovered all of these discrepancies. And Nichiren's going to say, and then I started thinking the same thing. And he's going to get into how he found it. He goes, he proclaimed that because of this, heaven was angered, and the benevolent deities who would have guarded the nation found their powers weakened. And he declared that even though people praise the Lotus Sutra, they destroy its heart. Then the priests of the 7 major temples of Nara, of the 15 great temples, and of all the temples and mountain monasteries throughout the country of Japan, hearing these words, were greatly incensed. They were pissed off at him for saying that. Mahadeva of India and the Taoist priests of China have appeared in our country talking about Dengyo. Right? They exclaim, they have taken on the form of this little monk known as Saicho. Dengyo. Everybody knows that's Dengyo, right? If anyone should encounter him, break his head in two and cut off his arms, beat him and curse him. Yeah. But, luckily, remember what happened with Dengyo. Does everybody remember what the deal with Dengyo? He said all this, got everybody pissed off. Everybody was saying kill him, right? And what did Emperor Kamu say? He says, let's do this the right way. Let's have a debate. He called the 7 temples together. Dengyo handed them their lunch in about 3 minutes. They all had the emperor put down an edict. These guys don't know what the hell they're talking about. Everybody will now report to Dengyo. The Lotus Sutra will be held superior. We are going to build the ordination platform, and anybody who wants to be a Buddhist priest is going to have to be ordained there, or they're not a Buddhist priest according to my edict, Emperor Kamu. Okay, get it? So he's saying, but Emperor Kamu, being a worthy ruler, inquired into and clearly perceived the truth of the matter, and concluded that the 6 schools of Nara were in error, because he heard them debate with Saicho, and they lost. For the first time, he established a temple on Mount Hei, making it the headquarters of the Tendai Lotus School. And he not only founded an ordination platform for the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment, but declared the Lotus Sutra to be superior to the 6 older schools connected with the 7 major temples of Nara and the 15 great temples. Everybody understand?
Yeah.
Okay. But then, unfortunately, Dengyo's disciples at Mount Hei took on true word. That's Jikaku and Chisho. Okay? That's where we get screwed up again. It didn't last, because how could it? It's not the latter day of the law yet. Dengyo hasn't said a damn word about Nam Myoho Renge-kyo. Right?
Right.
So in effect, the 6 schools came to be regarded as mere expedient teachings leading to the Lotus Sutra. It was like the earlier instance in which the gods yielded to the Buddha and became mere doorkeepers of Buddhism. Something like the same situation prevailed in Japan. For the first time, it was made clear in this country that, as the sutra says, among those sutras, the lotus is foremost. A person who is able to secretly expound the Lotus Sutra to one person is the envoy of the thus come one, it declares. And for the first time, such an envoy appeared in this country, Dengyo. For a period of 20 or more years during the reigns of the 3 emperors Kamu, Hizei, and Saga, throughout the entire country of Japan, everyone was a practitioner of the Lotus Sutra for at least 20 years. But just as the foul-smelling aranda tree exists in relation to the fragrant sandalwood, and just as Devadatta exists in relation to Shakyamuni, so at the same time as the great teacher Dengyo, there appeared a sage known as the great teacher Kobo. Everybody knows who Kobo is, right? Disciple of Honen, Nimbutsu. He journeyed to China, studied the He journeyed to China, studied the Mahavrachana Sutra and the teachings of the True Word School, and then returned to Japan. While the great teacher Dengyo was still alive, that's right, because that's how Mount Hei got infected. While the great teacher Dengyo was still alive, Kobo did not forcefully assert his contention that the Mahavrachana Sutra is superior to the Lotus Sutra. But after the great teacher Dengyo passed away on the 4th day of the 6th month in the 13th year of the Konin era, he apparently concluded that the time had come to do so. Thus, in the 14th year of the Konin era, on the 19th day of the 1st month, the great teacher Kobo produced a document in which he ranked the true word teachings first, the teachings of the Flower Garland Sutra second, and those of the Lotus Sutra third. That's right. Kobo's the one that threw the 3-pronged thing from China and it landed in Japan. He found it in the rocks. It was all right BS. He also asserted that the Lotus School is a doctrine of childish theory. Talk about slander. That Shakyamuni Buddha is in the region of darkness. compared to Mahavajrana Buddha, right? And that the men of the Tendai school are thieves who stole the ghee of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life after they had inserted it, right? Okay? In this manner, he attempted to deceive Emperor Saga by placing his own true word school side by side with the 7 older schools and asserting that the 7 older schools represent mere expedient teachings while the true word school represents the ultimate truth. In the period that followed, everyone throughout the country of Japan became a follower of the true word school. In addition, a disciple of the great teacher Dengyo named Jikaku journeyed to China, where he made a thorough study of the secret teaching of the Tendai and True Word schools before returning to Japan. He wrote commentaries on 2 works, the Diamond Crown Sutra and the Sudsiddhakara Sutra, and founded a temple called Zento-in on Mount Hei. In his commentaries, he asserted that the Mahavajrana Sutra should be ranked first and the Lotus Sutra second, and he put forth countless other erroneous statements, just as Kobo had done earlier. I have touched upon this matter somewhat in my earlier letters. And that's, what was the other one? Mount Hei, what was the other? The temple. The one that Jikaku started before he got his hands on, I'll think of it later. He'll probably mention it later. But at any rate, this story has been told by Nichiren in many goshos. He says, the eminent teacher who followed by another, the great teacher Chisho, who I just mentioned, who propagated his teachings from the temple known as Anju, that's the temple I was looking for, Anju-ji. Among all the temples today, this one appears to me to be causing the greatest damage to the nation. Among the 3,000 priests of Mount Hei, there were some who, if Jikaku and Chisho had not insisted upon the point, would never have acknowledged the superiority of the true word teachings. But all of them had their mouths stopped and their mouths deceived by Jikaku, also known as the great teacher Inen, and no one was able to say a word in opposition. Moreover, the support lent by the ruler and his ministers surpassed even what had been in the time of Dengyo and Kobo, so that Mount Hei and the 7 temples of Nara, and indeed the whole country of Japan, joined in declaring that the Lotus Sutra was inferior to the Mahavajrana Sutra. In the various temples where the Lotus Sutra had earlier been propagated, the teachings of the True Word School were now disseminated and hailed as superior to the Lotus Sutra. 400 years or more have passed since this situation developed. These erroneous opinions have continued to spread, and 5 sovereigns from the 51st ruler of Japan from the 81st ruler of Japan to the 85th have lost their thrones. Because the Buddhist way has fallen into decline, the way of the sovereign has likewise declined. In addition, the major erroneous doctrine known as the Zen school and the minor erroneous doctrine called the Nembutsu have joined the great evil doctrine called True Word, and these evil schools now stand side by side, holding sway over the entire country. The sun goddess, major character on the Gohonzon, the sun goddess has lost heart and no longer protects her charges. Great Bodhisattva Hachiman, on the other side, also very prominently on the Gohonzon, has been sapped of his power and authority and has ceased to guard and defend the nation. In the end, we are doomed to become the prey of a foreign land. I, Nichiren, now we get it. I, Nichiren, viewing this state of affairs and fearful of the warning about one who is betraying the Buddhist teachings and about one who will fall into hell along with those evil persons, have attempted to inform the ruler of the nation of the general situation. But led astray by erroneous doctrines, he refuses to believe me. On the contrary, he has become a deadly enemy. Although I try to point out that this country is full of people who would like to do away with the Lotus Sutra, no one understands me, and so they merely go on committing errors of foolishness. And now, in addition, a votary of the Lotus Sutra has made his appearance, so that the people of Japan, on top of their foolishness, give way to anger, favoring erroneous teachings and viewing the correct teaching with hatred. In a country where the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and foolishness prevail to such a degree, how can there be peace and stability? In the kalpa of decline, the 3 major calamities will occur. namely the calamities of fire, water, and wind. And in the kalpa of decrease, the three minor calamities will occur, namely famine, pestilence, and warfare. Famine occurs as a result of greed, pestilence as a result of foolishness, and warfare as a result of anger. At present, the people of Japan number 4,994,828 men and women, all of them different persons, but all alike infected by the three poisons. And these three poisons occur because of their relationship with Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So all of these people at the same moment set out to curse, attack, banish, and do away with Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions. This is what leads to the appearance of the three minor calamities. And now I wonder what karma from past experiences and now I wonder what karma from past existences has caused Nichiren and his associates to become the proponents of the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. It seems to me that at present Brahma, Shakra, the gods of the sun and the moon, the four heavenly kings, the sun goddess, the great Bodhisattva Hachiman, and all the major and minor gods of the 3,132 shrines throughout Japan are like King Rinda of past times, that the white horses are Nichiren, and that the white swans are my followers. The neighing of the white horses is the sound of our voices chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, while Brahma and Shakra, the gods of the sun and the moon and the four heavenly kings and the others, hear this sound. How could they fail to take on a healthy color and to shine with a brilliant light? How could they fail to guard and protect us? How could we fail to achieve Kosen Rufu, is what he's saying. We should be firmly convinced of this. In the memorial service held this last third month, you donated numerous strings of coins. As a result, this year we've been able to support over 100 men at this mountain dwelling, and they are able to read and recite the Lotus Sutra and discuss its doctrines all day long. In this evil latter age, this represents the foremost Buddhist practice in all of Jumpovipa. How pleased your departed ancestors must be. Shakyamuni Buddha said that a person who observes filial piety deserves to be called a world-honored one. Are not you yourself such a world-honored one? No matter of the late Acharya Daishin was surely, the matter of the late Acharya, that means priest, Daishin was surely most regrettable, but we should consider what has happened will serve to further spread the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. If my life is spared, there are many other things I want to write to you about on some future occasion. Nichiren. And it's that time. Okay, so we did it again. You guys want to? Let me give you a one-page. You're gonna like this Go Show. It's a cool Go Show. It's very short. It's only one page long.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Letters of Jakunichi-bo. It's the next one after King Rinda. It's on page 993. Let me just read the background quickly. This letter was written to a young disciple named Jakunichi-bo Nikkei, the son of the Lord of Ikitsu, Kazusa province. It is dated the 16th day of the 9th month with no year indicated, though it is believed to be 1279. Early in the Brunei era, Jakunichi-bo and his family had become followers of the Daishonin, who was then propagating his teachings in their area. Jakunichi-bo became a priest and later founded Chanjo-ji Temple in Kaminato to commemorate the place of the Daishonin's birth. It is also thought that this letter may have been addressed through Jakunichi-bo to a woman believer who lived in Kazusa province. In this letter, the Daishonin discloses the meaning of his name Nichiren, implying that it signifies the Buddha who will bring enlightenment to all people in the latter day of the law. He declares that his disciples must also exert themselves to convey the supreme teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo to all humankind. Then the Daishonin explains that the demons who, according to legend, strip one of one's garments at the time of death, symbolize death stripping one of all pretensions and superficial attainments, whether wealth, power, or knowledge. In conclusion, the Daishonin encourages Jakunichi-bo, pledging to protect him in the next life, since the latter protected the Daishonin in this life. Thus, the Daishonin suggests the profound and timeless nature of the teacher-disciple relationship. Letter to Jakunichi-bo, page 993. I deeply appreciate your sending a letter to this distant place. It is extremely rare to be born as a human being. Not only are you endowed with human form, but you have had the rare fortune to encounter Buddhism. Moreover, out of the Buddha's many teachings, you have encountered the Daimoku, or the title of the Lotus Sutra, and become its votary. This applies to every single one of us.
That's right.
Truly, you are a person who has offered alms to 100,000 million Buddhas, 10 billion Buddhas in his past existences. Nichiren is the supreme votary of the Lotus Sutra in Japan. In this land, only he has lived the 20-line verse of the encouraging devotion chapter. Do you remember that? What that is, right? Okay. The 800,000 million Nayutas of Bodhisattvas pledged with this verse to propagate the Lotus Sutra, but not one of them has fulfilled the pledge. The parents who gave life to this extraordinary person, Nichiren, are the most blessed of all people in Japan. This is no doubt because of karmic forces that they became my parents, and I, their child. If Nichiren is the envoy of the Lotus Sutra and the thus come one Shakyamuni, then his parents must also share this relationship. That same thing applies to all of you. They are like the king, wonderful adornment, and lady, pure virtue, with their sons, pure storehouse and pure eye. Could the two Buddha Shakyamuni and many treasures have been born as Nichiren's parents? Or if not, could his parents have been among the 800,000 million Nayutas of Bodhisattvas, or the 4 Bodhisattvas led by Bodhisattva superior practices? It is beyond comprehension. But take to heart, that's the truth. Even though it's beyond comprehension. Names are important for all things. That is why the great teacher Chintai placed name first among the 5 major principles. My giving myself the name Nichiren, Sun Lotus, derives from my own enlightenment regarding the Buddha vehicle. This may sound as though I think I am wise, but there are specific reasons for what I say. The sutra reads, as the light of the sun and moon can banish all obscurity and gloom, so this person, as he advances through the world, can wipe out the darkness of living beings. Hero of the world, right? Mm-hmm. Consider carefully what this passage signifies. This person, as he advances through the world, means that the first 500 years of the latter day of the law will witness the advent of Bodhisattva superior practices. Me. My equivalency. Who will illuminate the darkness of ignorance and earthly desires with the light of the 5 characters of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which is 7 characters, right? In accordance with this passage, Nichiren, as this Bodhisattva's envoy, has urged the people of Japan to accept and uphold the Lotus Sutra. His unremitting efforts never slacking, even here on this mountain. The sutra then goes on to say, after I pass into extinction, one should accept and uphold this sutra. Such a person, assuredly and without doubt, will attain the Buddha way. You burn. When one does, so does another. Mm-hmm. Therefore, those who become Nichiren's disciples and lay believers should realize the profound karmic relationship they share with him and spread the Lotus Sutra as he does. As he does. Be of the same mind, not halfway. Completely as he does, as he teaches. Being known as a votary of the Lotus Sutra, this is my favorite part, is a bitter yet unavoidable destiny. Because of everything that's included in being the Buddha. You have to face all of the obstacles. You have to do human revolution. So he's like, it's kind of like, it's a great honor, but it's not easy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everybody around this table groan. Okay, everybody got that part of it. Okay, Fan Kuai, Changliang, Masakado, and Sumitomo never acted cowardly because they cared so deeply about their honor and abhorred disgrace. But disgrace in this life is nothing. A far greater concern is the disgrace that appears in the next life. Proceed to the place of practice of the Lotus Sutra, bearing in mind the time when you must face the wardens of hell and the garment-snatching demoness, and the garment-suspending demon will strip off your clothes on the bank of the river of 3 crossings. The Lotus Sutra is the robe that will keep you from disgrace after this life. That's the clothes you're going to be able to wear after you die. Because whatever you wear when you die stays here. All right? The sutra reads, it is like a robe to one who is naked. Believe in the Gohonzon with all your heart, for it is the robe to protect you in the world after death. No wife would ever leave her husband unclothed, nor any parents fail to feel pity for their child shivering in the cold. Shakyamuni, Buddha, and the Lotus Sutra are like one's wife and parents. You have helped me and thereby saved me from disgrace in this life. In return, I will protect you from disgrace in the next. What one has done for another yesterday will be done for oneself today. Blossoms turn into fruit, and brides become mothers-in-law. Chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and always be diligent in your faith. I cannot thank you enough for your frequent letters, Jakunichi-bo. Please convey all these teachings in detail to that believer, Nichiren. What a cool question, huh? My pleasure to share it. Thank you all. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.